into it. Right, let's go. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Yanto Guy. I'm a vehicle safety and technology consultant with TRL. And this morning, my function is to introduce you to TRL, Transport Research Laboratory, and to talk a little bit about the project that led up to this, to the development of the tool that we're launching today. So the project is Project Endeavour. This was an Innovate-led project in which we were part of a collaboration with a number of companies, which we will speak about later. The tool we are launching is the CAMSAT tool, the Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance Tool, which is a computerized and online safety assurance tool for, well, standardizing the process of doing safety assurance and for reviewing safety cases. More on that later. First of all, let's do some housekeeping. Oh, let's also make the computer work. There we go. So first of all, please make sure that you're muted, and I think cameras off as well, because very often people like me struggle with bandwidth. Morning, Thomas. We just said camera. Oh, there we go. If you have any questions, if you could write them in the chat box. We have a Q&A session right at the end of the presentation, so I think we'll deal with questions at the end. So if you can write them in as you think of them into the chat box, and we'll pick them up. We may pick them up as we're going along, but probably we'll deal with them at the end. The session is being recorded. That recording is going to be made available later to review. So, some introductions. I'm joined this morning by Ailey McGregor, who is operating the machinery in the background of this presentation and looking after recordings and all that kind of thing. Ailey is a graduate researcher with TRL. I'm also joined by Will Perrin, who is a safety and risk consultant with TRL, and I'm joined by Ros Walker, who is the technical lead for this project, who is a senior safety and risk consultant. And we also have a number of other TRL people lurking in the background. So a little bit about TRL. The history of TRL goes back to 1933. We were, to begin with, part of the Department for Transport, or whatever the Department for Transport has been called throughout the years. So we were effectively set up as the research and development wing for the Department for Transport. And through the years, we've done a huge variety of transport safety and infrastructure projects. So, for example, things like the zebra crossing and the mini roundabout is all TRL work that we did many years ago. In 1996, TRL was privatised. We are now owned by a non-profit distributing trust. So we are entirely independent. We don't have any shareholders. So we were a non-profit distributing research organisation working independently of government, but obviously doing quite a lot of government projects, but also working for lots of other people as well. TRL's vision is to create clean, efficient transport that is safe, reliable and accessible for everyone. And our mission is creating the future of transport using independent research and innovative thinking to develop sustainable solutions. And you can see that there are some themes developing in there about clean and sustainable and safe and so on. We have fairly recently reviewed the strategic direction and the strategic organization of TRL. And we now have kind of 6 key strategic themes, and these split into 2 groups. So on the left-hand side there, we have the sort of key societal and economic drivers for change. In no particular order, the top one is environment and decarbonisation, working on reducing the environmental impact of transport, improving its sustainability. Part of that, of course, includes reducing the amount of carbon that it produces. The next one down has been a key theme for TRL throughout our history, and that is transport safety. So improving the safety of all of the various modes of transport that we are involved with. So we are principally involved with land transport. and principally road transport. So we do get involved with rail, and we do get involved with off-highway and things like that. But primarily, we work in the road transport sector. Next down is Transport for Sustainable Development. Alex Edwards is on the call. She is the head of Transport for Sustainable Development. So this is the essentially looking at the way in which we can improve the access to transport for low and middle income countries, and doing that in a sustainable way. So obviously, as low and middle income countries start to develop their transport infrastructure, there is a danger that they go through the same journey that high income countries have been through, with all of the environmental effect that might have. So the strategic goal of ensuring transport is sustainably developed in those low and middle income countries is one of our key goals, and is all about ensuring that essentially they can leapfrog some of those steps that we went through that were more damaging in the higher income countries. So over on the right hand side, we have opportunities to enable better outcomes. At the top there, we have digitalization of transport. So this is using information technologies and to collect the data that is being generated by vehicles and is being generated by infrastructure to improve the way in which those systems work. So either to improve the infrastructure, to improve the vehicles, or indeed to improve the way that those two things work together. Next one down, and obviously the key theme for us today is automation in transport. Automation has become one of the kind of big news stories over the last few years, and obviously there are an enormous number of organisations who are working on the development of automated transport systems in all kinds of different guises, both on land and in the air and in the sea as well. Again, we concentrate on land vehicles, and automation has become one of the big areas of business for TRL, and certainly one of our big growth areas. We do an awful lot of work in lots of different facets of that area. And the final one is new mobility. So new mobility is essentially all of those new types of transport that are emerging or have emerged fairly recently. And that ranges from things like e-scooters and all of the new micro mobility devices, hoverboards, and all those kinds of things, through to some of the rather bigger things, so things like Hyperloop and all of those new types of transport system and indeed vehicle. So TRL's history with automated vehicles, this again goes back a very long way. So back in the 1960s, we were involved with the development of an automated car. We developed an automated Citroën DS, which might still be on display in the Science Museum. It was certainly there the last time I went. So our history with automated vehicles goes back an awfully long way. Our recent history with automated vehicles perhaps starts back in 2015 with Project Gateway. So this is a collaborative project in which we ran some automated pods on the Greenwich Peninsula. We worked together with people like Fusion Processing, who provided the automation system, Westfield Cars, who actually built the pods themselves. And one of our big roles in this trial was the development of the safety assurance process and the safety cases and so on. Since then, we've worked on projects like Driven and Streetwise, which have been looking at urban ride sharing, urban mobility. And again, one of our big roles in these projects was the development of the safety cases and the verification of that safety assurance process. Helm UK is a current project that TRL are leading. So this is a platooning project in which we are running 3 HGVs on the UK road network in a platoon. So the idea here is that the lead vehicle is driven by a human driver, and then there are 2 vehicles, 2 HGVs following it, which do have a human driver in the cab. But the headway, the separation between those vehicles, is dealt with by an automated system. And the idea is that ultimately this will lead to the creation of production platooning systems in which you can chain together lots of lorries using an automated system as they run up and down the motorway network. The intention is that that improves the efficiency of those vehicles because effectively they're operating as a single train, and also it reduces driver workload and things like that. But hopefully in a way that means that when a vehicle gets to its destination or gets to the junction where its destination might be, that vehicle can peel off and the platoon can then reform and carry on working up the motorway. TRL are also involved in test beds. We have our own test bed, the Smart Mobility Living Lab London, which was developed over the last few years with support from Innovate. Again, this was a collaborative project with a range of partners who contributed their expertise to the development of the SMLL. But TRL are effectively the leader of that project. We run SMLL almost as a department of TRL, although it is a separate company. So we come to Project Endeavour. Project Endeavour is the current project that led to the development of the tool that we're launching today. Again, like so many of our projects, it was collaborative and funded by Innovate UK. So Project Endeavour is a mobility project designed to accelerate and scale the adoption of automated vehicle services across the UK. Our partners in this project were Oxbotica, who are the lead trialling organisation, DG Cities, who are leading on the service design and are also leading public engagement. Immense, who are a simulation company who are doing simulation for the trials. Oxfordshire County Council, who are our local authority partner, who have developed the onboarding and engagement process. And then finally, TRL and the British Standards Institution, and we're working on the development of safety assurance and the safety assurance process and making that a more straightforward and flexible process. Some of the work that's taken place through Project Endeavour has been setting up pilots of connected and automated vehicle trials. You can see on the screen there we have an automated Ford, and we have a series of those running around in different locations. One of the new themes that has emerged through Project Endeavour is that we are trying to do what we're calling pop-up mobility. So historically, obviously, there have been a series of automated vehicle trials, but they have tended to be in a single location. So TRL ourselves have run trials in Greenwich and in various parts of London, but those have been concentrated in a single area. We haven't tried to pick up that same trial and take it to a different city. So one of the big themes for Project Endeavour is that we are trying to take those trials that we've started in Oxford and we're moving them to different cities to essentially test and develop the process of being able to move around, because clearly as we develop automation into, well, away from being a research activity into being a real production activity, we're going to need to get to the point where we can operate these vehicles in wherever we might choose to go. So what Endeavour is trying to do is ease that process of moving from one trial site to another. So some of the safety challenges with automated vehicles and their trials and testing. So the objectives we have is to ensure safety throughout trials and testing. Clearly, safety is a very important, if not the most important theme in all of the automated vehicle world. The automated vehicle world, as I'm sure you all know, is at a point now where it is still sufficiently sensitive and still not established enough that any single incident has a really massive effect on the public perception of what automated vehicles are all about. We saw with the Uber collision in America a few years ago, the effect of that single fatality in America had a global effect on the way the automated vehicle world was working, and indeed a very big effect, a global effect on public opinion around automated mobility. Now, clearly that collision was a tragedy, But of course, we don't get worried about every single fatality, every single road fatality that happens in America every day, or indeed every single road fatality that happens in the UK every day. But because of where we are in the development process for automated vehicles, the level of public sensitivity and the level of public distrust is obviously extremely high. So we need to ensure that we take the public with us as we develop automated vehicles, and part of that process is ensuring that they are as safe as they possibly can be. The next objective is to ensure that we enable testing and development. I mentioned that one of our goals is to be able to move trials around from one location to the other. At the moment, that process is not as straightforward as it could be. There are barriers to being able to pick up a trial and move it from one town to another. The next objective, and I've touched upon it already, is to enhance public confidence. Because automated vehicles are still new, there is a level of public distrust, and we need to work to establish trust within the public. So our objective really is to ensure that the public comes with us, the public understands what's happening, and are able to make informed choices about automated vehicles. So the challenges, we have the challenge of providing assurance to stakeholders, and those stakeholders range from individual members of the public right through to local and roads authorities, the emergency services, government, and so on. So we have a very broad spectrum of stakeholders who are interested in what we and what the broader automated vehicle industry are doing. We have the problem that the complexity of trials is enormously variable. So everything from what you might describe as passenger trials, where we have a manually driven vehicle that is carrying some piece of equipment related to automated vehicle development. So we might be carrying a new LiDAR, or we might be carrying some sort of perception system, cameras or whatever, where they're not having any role in driving the vehicle, right through to the extremely complex and sophisticated trials that Oxbotica are running, where they do have a vehicle that is being driven by its automation system, very sophisticated sensing and perception system, and so on. So there is a very broad spectrum technologically in what we might be doing, and the level of complexity of the environments in which those vehicles are operating as well. The next challenge is consistency in safety case development and evaluation. There isn't necessarily one correct way to develop a safety case or to do safety evaluation. And of course, we're also dealing with a very broad spectrum of trials organizations who are attempting to prepare these safety assurance documents. So everything from, some very small startups that might be half a dozen people, and with as a company, relatively little experience. So they might only have been running for a couple of years, perhaps, right up to the very biggest international OEMs who have been around for decades and have thousands of people at their disposal to help with this process. That doesn't imply necessarily that either of those are the best or the worst at doing these things. The business of developing automated vehicles is kind of new to everybody. So even if you are an OEM that's been around for 100 years, it doesn't necessarily imply that you have the correct balance of skills and experience to be able to do the best, to be able to prepare the best safety assurance documentation. So the solutions, we want to try and come up with a standardized approach to safety. The aim of standardization is to make it simple for everybody, to make it understandable for everybody, whether you are preparing a safety case or whether you are the recipient, the reviewer of a safety case. If you have a standard process, then everybody knows what's supposed to be in it. Everybody knows what it's supposed to look like. We also want to ensure that safety is proportionate. I started this slide by saying that safety is the most important thing that we do in the automated vehicle industry. It's probably the most important thing that we do in the transport industry. But also we need to ensure that safety is proportionate. And there is a danger that we create safety assurance processes which are so complex and difficult to navigate that we end up doing no trials at all. So we need to ensure that there is a balance between ensuring that the level of risk associated with a trial or a particular vehicle is acceptable, and also ensuring that it's actually possible eventually to go and do that trial without getting so bogged down in the process of doing the safety assurance. And finally, the solution is that we provide more assurance to stakeholders. We go out and we talk to people and we explain what's happening and the reasons why we're doing the things that we're doing, and also we provide them with tools. And one of the purposes of the CAMSAT tool is to be able to provide those stakeholders with a tool that they are able to access and use. So this is the existing safety structure, the existing standardization structure. So at the top there, we have the Department for Transport's Code of Practice for Automated Vehicle Trialling, which has been around for a couple of years now in its current form. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It provides very good top-level guidance on how trials ought to be conducted, but doesn't get into very many specifics. So if you're a trialling organisation, or indeed if you're a local authority or a landowner or whatever, it can be very difficult to interpret the code of practice to properly understand what is required of you or what you might require of somebody else seeking to trial in your area. Below that, we have a whole series of PAS standards which are maintained by BSI. So PAS 1880, the design of control systems, PAS 1881, which is all about safety cases and safety assurance, PAS 1882, which is about data collection, 1883, which is about the development of the operational design domain, and is an attempt to standardize the way in which the operational design domain is described and specified, and provides a taxonomy for the operational design domain. And finally, PAS 1884, which is all about safety drivers, their responsibilities and their training and so on. Sitting below PAS 1881 is the Zenzik Safety Case Framework, which is specifically there for the test beds. It's been specifically created for the test beds. So to talk a little more about the Department of Transport's Code of Practice for Automated Vehicle Trialling, within that document, they say trialling organisations are expected to develop a detailed safety case before conducting trials, which demonstrates that the trial activity can be conducted safely. Okay. Those planning a trial should engage with all relevant organisations with responsibility for the trial's areas. This can lead to a level of confusion, of course, because who is relevant, who is a relevant organisation in the area that you're going to, might not necessarily be entirely obvious, and it might not be the same in all areas. So you might want to engage with the local authority, although the local authority doesn't actually have any legal responsibility for ensuring the safety of your trial. You might want to engage with the emergency services, although depending on where you're going, the response you get from the particular regional emergency service might be different. So the response that you get, for example, from the Metropolitan Police might be very different to the response that you get from Dyfed-Powys Police. And of course, there are a great many other organisations that you might also seek to engage with. You might want to engage with community organisations. You might want to engage with road safety organisations. And it isn't entirely clear who and in what way you ought to be engaging with them. So, what is a safety case? A safety case is a structured argument supported by evidence that demonstrates that a trial or testing is safe. A safety case is not the same thing as a risk assessment, although a risk assessment may be part of your safety case. In fact, you will almost certainly have risk assessments incorporated into your safety case. But the purpose of the safety case is to try and demonstrate that you've gone through the process of thinking about how your trial or how your vehicle is going to work, and have thought about all of the possible failure modes, all of the possible things that could happen, and have thought about mitigations for each of those, and have controlled the level of risk that you're creating to an acceptable level. The safety case is developed by the trialling organisation, although that might be done with support from other external organisations. So TRL does an awful lot of work supporting trials organisations in developing their safety cases. Why is it needed? A safety case is needed because it promotes safety during technology development. It promotes safety during the trials process. It minimises the risk of incidents, hopefully. So by going through that process of creating a safety case and thinking about mitigations for any failure modes, you hopefully reduce the possibility of any incident occurring. And finally, it provides assurance to stakeholders. So you may, and indeed the DFT's code of practice says that you should provide a safety, an abridged version of your safety case to stakeholders. Now that doesn't imply necessarily that you're going to provide them with the whole thing, but you will provide an abridged version that explains how you have managed the risk of the trial that you're proposing. There are several roles within the safety assurance process, and these roles interact. So on the left-hand side there, we have the safety case creators. These are the trialing organizations typically. So the people who are coming with the vehicle, who are coming with the automation system, who want to undertake a trial. It is usually their responsibility to prepare the safety case for that trial. On the other side, we have the various stakeholders that they will engage with. So their insurers, who obviously take the main financial risk of any incident. There's the local and roads authorities. And we must make it clear that we're also talking here about motorway authorities, so Highways England and people like that. And finally, the test beds and the landowners. Wherever it is that you're going to trial, you ought to be engaging with the place that you're going to trial. The circular arrows on this slide indicate that actually this is a circular process. That there is some negotiation, there is some discussion between the people preparing the safety case and their stakeholders. And the stakeholders may have some input into the safety case themselves, because of course, in preparing a safety case for a trial, you need to have a very good understanding of the area in which you're going to be trialing, and that understanding might actually come from the local authority or the landowner that you're dealing with. So this slide is just to explain a little more about the roles of stakeholders in safety assurance. So on the left-hand side there we have insurers. I mentioned that the insurers take the principal financial responsibility. They carry that financial risk of any incident that might occur. Now, the insurance business is based very much around historical precedent. So if you go and apply for insurance for your personal car, they'll ask you what car it is, they'll ask you where you live, they'll ask you who you are, how many accidents you've had, how long you've been driving for, whether you're a man or a woman, how old you are, and so on. And based on all of that information, they can make a very reasoned judgment about the level of risk that they are accepting by providing you with insurance. Now, of course, for automated vehicles, they don't have that historical precedent. They don't have 100 years of motoring history to be able to determine which systems are more risky than others. So the safety case for them is the primary piece of evidence that they're able to use to decide the level of risk that they're accepting by insuring a particular vehicle or a particular trial. For the road or local authorities, there's no responsibility and no expectation necessarily that they have to do any safety assurance work, but they may, or in fact do, have some responsibility for the safety of road users in their area. So they may take an interest in what's going on, and the level of interest that they take will very often depend on their level of experience, their previous experience of automated vehicle trials, and their general level of expertise in this area. Some local authorities will have none. Some, like Oxfordshire, will have a great deal of expertise internally and will wish to engage with the safety assurance process in some detail. The main interest from those roads and local authorities is that they want to understand how safety is being managed, to understand whether that makes any material difference to the level of risk for the other road users for which they have responsibility. And then finally, the test beds and the landowners. The test beds and the landowners want to understand what level of risk they are accepting by hosting a trial on their land or on their test bed. And obviously there may be concerns more broadly than just safety. There may also be concerns about the reputational damage that might occur if there is an incident. So if you think about the on-road test beds like SMLL, clearly we have a responsibility to the communities in which we are based, and we also have an interest in keeping those communities on side in terms of them not getting upset about automated vehicle trials happening on the road networks in which they also use. So reputational damage and reputational sensitivity can be a major issue for some of those landowners or test beds, as well as the primary issue of ensuring safety in those areas. This is a kind of simplification of the way this process might work. So on the left-hand side, we have those stakeholders, the insurers, the local and roads authorities, the test beds and the landowners. The options. So the approach that they may choose to take, each of these stakeholders, they may choose to undertake an independent technical review of a safety case. So they might effectively decide to do their own safety case review. There are some big issues with this, and we'll deal with that in a second. The other option they might take is to say, well, okay, we just need to satisfy ourselves that somebody has done this work. So we need to satisfy ourselves that there is a safety case that somebody has prepared and that's been done by an appropriate and responsible person. But we're not necessarily going to want to look at that safety case in any detail. So the big challenge is doing a safety case review is not a straightforward process by any means. So one of TRL's big areas of business at the moment is reviewing other people's safety cases for them. And this is a process that can go on for months and can take an enormous amount of technical expertise and input. And for many of these stakeholders, for the local and roads authorities, for the emergency services and so on, for the insurers, they don't necessarily have the technical expertise to be able to undertake that review of that safety case. That, of course, also implies that the cost of undertaking a review can be extremely high, many thousands of pounds to undertake a safety case review. There is also a concern amongst many stakeholders that by undertaking a safety case review of their own, that they then assume some liability for the trial itself. So if you're a local authority and somebody is coming to trial in your area, if you do a very detailed review of your safety case, there is a perception perhaps that you might then take on the liability for that trial somehow, but because you've looked at the paperwork and reviewed the paperwork, then perhaps now you're responsible for that paperwork. There is the problem that there is no standard approval mechanism. I mentioned that there are standards for the specification of safety assurance, but the method by which you meet that standard is not standardized. So the approach that different organizations take to the preparation of their safety case can be very different. And that obviously provides a challenge for anybody who wants to review that safety case, because they don't know necessarily what to expect and what they should be seeing where. It is very difficult, as I've alluded to previously, to transfer a trial from one area to another. The expectations of the area where you're moving to, in terms of the level of technical detail that they're expecting, the level of assurance that they're expecting, may not be the same from one area to another. And trialing organisations can find themselves having to effectively redo work that they've already done when they move from one local authority or one area, one test bed to another, because what they're asked for at the new place is different to what they were asked for at the previous place. And the other big challenge is safety case accessibility. Safety cases very often or usually contain information that may be extremely commercially sensitive about the way in which the control system, the automation system of an automated vehicle works. And trials organisations, understandably, are very reluctant to share that information with people who are external to their organisation. So it can be very difficult to be able to show people what you've done. And also, technically, the design of that safety case, a safety case very often is not a nice, neat single document that you can send somebody as a PDF. Very often, a safety case will be a whole series of different files and documents that are spread out through the company system. And it can be very, very difficult to share all of that information in an effective way with an external organization. So the solution is to develop a cost-effective review process that ensures compliance with the code of practice. So ensures that you're doing everything that you're asked to do by the DFT. Provides a consistent and simple approach so that everybody understands what they're supposed to be doing. So this is where the Endeavour project comes in. I'm going to hand over now to Ros to give a little bit more detail about the development of the Endeavour project and the way in which the CAMSAT tool has been designed to work.
Thank you. I'm Ros Walker. Sorry, I think there's a bit of feedback. That might be the answer. I'm Ros Walker, and I'm the technical lead for the safety work assurance work package for Project Endeavour. So this slide just really outlines the work stream objectives. So firstly, as I kind of alluded to, we wanted to improve consistency and reduce complexity in the approach to safety assurance. And really the key aim around this is to help support pop-up autonomy, so the ability to move between trialling locations with relative ease and not have lots of administrative burdens. The second kind of key objective is around improving understanding and capability for both those demonstrating and those assessing the safety of CAV trials. So with these objectives in mind, we've developed a couple of key materials/tools to support stakeholders in the safety assurance of CAV trials. Next slide, please. So in the initial stages of our work on this work stream, we decided to undertake some stakeholder engagement so that we could better identify the needs of different stakeholders involved in safety assurance, and B, develop some appropriate solutions to meet those needs. So we engaged with a range of key stakeholders, including those on the slide, so trialling organisations, road and local authorities, test beds and landowners, and insurance bodies. And the next few slides provides an outline of the key findings from this engagement, which has obviously provided context for our activities to follow. Next slide, please. So this slide kind of summarises some of the key findings from trialling organisations. So the first kind of key bit of feedback was that there's a real lack of understanding amongst other stakeholders that are reviewing safety cases around what safety assurance is and what a good safety case looks like. So I think trialling organisations have spent an awful lot of time in the first instance to try and educate other stakeholders before they then have obviously the ability to be able to review whatever information is presented to them. So it's quite a timely process for trialling organisations, particularly if you're wanting to move between different test beds or different locations. You kind of almost have to do the job of educating people again and again and again. So that was one of their frustrations. Another frustration was that safety assurance requirements from different stakeholders aren't necessarily uniform. So they have to keep kind of reinventing the information in different formats to suit the requirements of different people. So again, quite a laborious process. And obviously these kind of challenges make pop-up autonomy very difficult to achieve. Another thing that trialling organisations mentioned is that if there is a test bed or local authority area that is particularly extensive in their safety assurance requirements, this may be a barrier for them to test in that particular area, and they may choose to kind of go to another local authority who's a bit more kind of engaged at, you know, at more high level, if you know what I mean. So particularly if you know, they've dealt with certain local authorities before who understand the requirements and have comfortable with the information in the format they provide, it kind of goes against this idea of pop-up autonomy. So definitely it's a key barrier to testing if there's extensive safety assurance activities required. Next slide, please. So in terms of the road and local authorities, one of the kind of things that we noticed was there's a real variation in experience of CAV trialling. So there's those like Oxfordshire County Council who have done a number of different CAV trials over the last few years, whereas others were quite new to the whole thing. And obviously it's those particular local authorities who've not done it before that then require quite a lot of support in terms of the trialling organisation and help to understand the requirements around safety cases and safety assurance. There, as kind of trialling organisations alluded to, there was an inconsistency in the approach taken to the safety assurance of trials. So some local authorities were able and had the capability to do a full review of safety cases. Others were seeking independent reviews from external consultancies. And then others had created some kind of light touch process, you know, a few assessment questions to assess the safety of trials. I think the kind of key kind of point or learning from the stakeholder engagement was around this balance between safety and liability. So obviously road and local authorities have a responsibility to you know, ensure general duty of care of road safety in their domains, and they obviously really are keen to make sure that trials are being conducted safely and in line with standards, but at the same time they raise concerns about not wanting at all to take on any liability for trials, and it's, you know, this idea of signing off a safety case is a bit uncomfortable for them because they obviously feel that if they sign it off, then they're taking on the liability. Next slide, please. So in terms of insurers and insurance bodies, again, very similar kind of picture. We found a variation in experience. Some weren't interested in CAV trials at all. Others had maybe an interest but hadn't really done an awful lot on it. And then there were others that had been previously quite engaged on CAV trials, had got into the nitty-gritty of safety cases, really understood the risks. And it's those kind of latter group that have obviously managed to develop an extensive knowledge and expertise in their teams around the safety and risk review of trials, CAV trials. But there was a real variation in experience. Secondly, there was an inconsistency in the approach taken for safety assurance. So when we asked them the processes that they undertook, whilst there were similarities in processes, there was also a lot of key differences in their approach, which obviously makes it difficult for trialling organisations dealing with different insurers for different trials. Whilst this particular stakeholder is much more likely to get into the nitty-gritty of did you lose me for a second? Hopefully not.
We did. I just hit the button to appear, and then you reappeared. So.
Okay. All right.
We lost the last 10 seconds or so.
All right. Just the last point then was, yes, insurers are more likely to get into the nitty-gritty of safety cases, but at the same time, they still expressed an interest in some kind of high-level checklist. A high-level checklist to basically ensure that trials were adhering to all elements of the standards. Next slide, please. So lastly was the test beds and landowners. Again, similar pictures, so varied experience in trialling. I think all test beds and landowners were keen to kind of work towards accommodating CAVs at the very least, and obviously some of them had you know, quite a lot of exposure to CAV trials already. Similar, they didn't have, similar to insurers, they didn't have a standardised process for assessing risk. So there was like some of the more mature test beds had their own little risk assessment processes in place. And then the new ones we're kind of working towards developing those, but there was no kind of standardization because there's no particular tool to help standardize their approach. Again, because of the kind of amount of different new standards that are coming to market, they were interested again in the idea of a high-level checklist to support the safety review of trials and ensure that they kept up to date with new regulations and standards. And similar to the insurers, they again made very much stress the point that they are not keen to, or won't take on liability for trials. So that's very much in the domain of the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. So just some kind of other key findings which are kind of worth touching upon because they have helped to inform some of our future thinking on safety assurance. Firstly, that because of all the the new standards to market, etc., a lot of stakeholders expressed this requirement or interest in being kept up to date. So they found it very difficult and time consuming to keep up to date with everything that's changing in the cab industry, and some kind of support with that would be most welcome. Another point that was made by quite a lot of people was around the fact that at the moment, if there's an incident within cab trialling, then of course that's recorded, but anything before that, so near misses, undesired events, etc., are not currently recorded. So they were quite interested in some kind of knowledge sharing tool to log those kind of undesirable events, but also to share some of the, on the other hand, some of the best practice that's out there. So if a particular process works well with one trialling organisation, to potentially share that with others. So a knowledge sharing tool was of definite interest to people. We obviously discussed a number of ideas that we had through the stakeholder engagement to try and get some initial feedback, and obviously that's then helped to inform the outputs of this work package. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of key kind of outputs from the work package alongside many other things that we've been doing. So one is some stakeholder guidance documents, and this kind of is aimed to help improve understanding of the requirements for safety assurance. So we looked at, when we were doing stakeholder engagement, we really tried to understand what were the key gaps in knowledge. And then we've obviously then kind of developed guidance on the back of that. So we've produced 3 guidance documents in total, so trialling organisations, local authorities and insurers. We decided not to do one for the test beds because obviously there's already the Zensic safety case guidance framework, which I know we've referenced here already in the chat. So we'll be sending out a link to these documents following on from the webinar. We'll send out an email probably next week. But just as a high level, I'm not sure if we've got any insurers on the call, but I'll just run through the trialling organisations and insurers. So in terms of the trialling organisations, the broad contents is what is safety assurance and what are the requirements for trialling organisations. It then deep dives into 3 subject areas that came up within the stakeholder interview as areas that trialling organisations felt they need more guidance on. So that's stakeholder engagement, emergency response planning and research ethics. And for each of these, we've provided case studies, so including one from Oxbotica, which is obviously one of the partners on the consortium. In terms of the insurance guidance, that provides a detailed understanding of safety assurance from the perspective of insurers. It outlines a process for insurers to follow for safety assurance, and again includes case studies from those that have obviously had quite a lot of experience already in the cab sector. Next slide, please. So in addition to the guidance, we've also created a new online software tool called CAMSAT, which stands for Connected and Automated Mobility Safety Assurance Tool. And that's largely the focus of the rest of today's session. So the aim of CAMSAT is to facilitate a fast and efficient trial safety review process that allows safety to be assured to stakeholders whilst addressing the challenges that have been identified through our stakeholder engagement. So I'll now pass you over to Will, who'll provide an overview of the tool and we'll run through a demo.
Hi everyone, thanks Ros. So yeah, as Ros mentioned, she's taking you through all the sort of key challenges that we found throughout our stakeholder engagement, and that's really led to the development of the CAMSAT tool. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides that tells you how this tool works and how it addresses those challenges, and then I'll do a quick demo at the end of the tool. So firstly, what is CAMSAT? So CAMSAT has really been developed to support the exchange of safety assurance information between a trialling organisation and stakeholders that are involved in those trials. So the CAMSAT tool is open to two types of users mainly. So that would be reviewers and trialling organisations. So this tool is based around asking the trialling organisation to complete a questionnaire that contains high-level questions on safety. And those questions are designed primarily to ensure compliance with relevant regulations, standards, and good practice. So once that questionnaire is then completed, the answers are fed back to the reviewer for comment, and that allows that sort of two-way exchange of information, all kept in one easily accessible file. The aim is that this presents a simple approach to streamline safety assurance for CAV trials and address those key challenges that we found. So the aim is that the tool is usable by all types of stakeholders, including obviously the trialling organisation, the local authorities, road authorities, landowners, and test beds. Next slide, please. So these few slides just take us through some of the key challenges that have been alluded to already, and just addresses how CAMSAT tackles those. So in terms of the first challenges, obviously the case of assurance versus liability. Obviously, reviewers will need to be assured that a trial is being conducted safely, but it's often important to the reviewers that they're not accepting responsibility for safety by doing a review. So as a result, they often don't want to do a technical detailed review, or are seen to be doing a sign-off process. Otherwise, they could take on some of that liability. So obviously, there needs to be a balance between safety assurance and liability. And the real benefit of the CAMSAT tool is that it uses a self-declaration approach by the trialling organisation. So it uses that high-level questionnaire that I've mentioned. So this means that the stakeholders don't have to undertake a detailed technical review of the safety case, and so the liability rests with the trialling organisation. So aside from the liability issues, obviously doing a detailed technical review can be significantly resource and time intensive, not just for the stakeholder, but also for the trialling organisation who has to accommodate that. So CAMSAT really simplifies this to just a review of the answers to the questionnaire, and it's all completely automated. So the tool allows each parties to track the exchange of information, guides both parties through the workflow, and really should hope to streamline that review of safety information and prevent that kind of safety assurance activity from having an impact on the start of the trial. Next slide, please. I think I've jumped ahead a little bit there. So yeah, that was just the points I was going through. So if you could just go to the next slide again. So in terms of sort of requirements in the UK and keeping consistency, obviously a key benefit of the tool is that the self-declaration questionnaires can be, well, because they're all online, they can be easily configured and updated at any time. So this means that if there are any specific or bespoke questions that need to be developed to address specific stakeholder requirements, that can be done. For example, in London, the questionnaire might incorporate passenger service sort of license requirements that are required by the TfL, and that can be easily incorporated into the questionnaire. The benefit of this flexibility is also that if new standards or guidance or regulations come out, or if older ones are updated, then the questionnaire can be immediately updated to meet those new requirements and ensure that best practice safety assurance is being delivered. Next slide, please. So in terms of protecting IP, which is obviously quite a big deal, rightly so, for the trialling organisation, the difficulty obviously being that safety cases and safety assessments often contain that sort of commercially sensitive material. And with CAMSAT, we're really just focusing on the high-level questions that are asked. And those questions are really focused on compliance with standards and best practice, for example, the Code of Practice or BSI, PAS standards. So really, it's something that it's requirements that everyone's aware of. It doesn't contain any commercially sensitive information. And that's really the sort of one of the key benefits of the CAMSAT tool. Also, for any information that is shared, it is handled securely. So CAMSAT tool is part of the IMAP software family developed by TRL Software. And that's a tool that regularly handles sensitive data such as collision statistics, etc. So any information that is provided will be stored securely within that tool and only accessible by the reviewer and the trialling organisation. Next slide, please. So the final challenge is maintaining an audit trail of all safety assurance and engagement activities. So this is often found to be quite difficult previously, as it's been done mainly via email. It's hard to keep a track of all the decision points and all the evidence flowing both ways. So within the CAMSAT tool, the entire workflow is automated and records of the information exchange are kept securely in a single case file. And this can really help to hopefully support decision makers who want to collate their evidence for decisions and also recall safety assurance information if needed. Next slide, please. So that was just a quick summary of how the tool works, why we developed it in this way, and how it hopefully addresses the challenges. So just to summarize, this is really a tool that's based off of what we know people want. So this has been developed really to align with the requirements of the stakeholders that we've engaged with. So we really hope that as a result, it's going to address those requirements for all types of stakeholders, including trialling organisations, local authorities, road authorities, etc. In terms of the approach, in terms of that high level self-declaration process, this is the format that test beds already do. It's something that is done at SMLL, the Smart Mobility Living Lab in London, and it's other test beds as well. So it's already a well understood approach, and we're just trying to adapt that into a new use case for automation and for the different stakeholders. The aim is to really reduce the burden on trialling organisations and reviewers, so we can aim to stop safety assurance from becoming a barrier to trialling and testing in the UK. And hopefully in this high level approach, we're still maintaining adequate levels of safety and encourage better safety communication all around. The key requirement from Endeavour is to ensure we can enable interoperability within the UK, and we hope that the CAMSAT tool really does that, as it applies a consistent approach to safety that can be adopted across the UK. So again, this aims to reduce barriers to testing and encourage movement of testing between different areas in the UK. So that's really a key benefit for CAMSAT. And finally, just looking forward and reflecting on where we are in the UK. At the moment, there isn't an approval scheme in place for automated vehicles, but there will be in due time. But in the meantime, because of that, there's no simple way to share safety information and confirm that the safety of a vehicle. So what we're trying really to do in terms of CAMSAT is not to replace or overrule any approval schemes that come in the future. We're really just trying in that interim period to sort of bridge the gap to ensure that safety assurance is efficient and consistent, ensure that safety is really being maintained during that sort of trials and testing period before an approval scheme is implemented. Next slide, please. Thanks. Just go back. Yanto? Just back to the next step slide, please. That'd be great.
Sorry, computer's gone berserk.
No worries. So just the next slide in the pack, please.
1 second. There we go. How's that?
That's brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, so just in terms of the next steps, currently the tool is essentially been developed as a concept. So we have a working concept right now, but we are looking to pilot that tool and test it out over the summer before the end of the Endeavour project. So we're exploring the possibility of using the tool within the Endeavour project for the upcoming Greenwich trials in August, but we are also keen to explore using it for other CAV trials outside of Endeavour. So with the aim is to really get some rich feedback on how it can be used, how usable it is, and what's the best way to implement it in practice. So if you are interested in piloting the tool, then do let us know. Get in contact with us after the webinar or whenever you feel like. So further to that, we also need to look at how the tool can best be implemented in practice. So in essence, who would be hosting the tool, whether that's via the local authority or other reviewer that's hosting it, or via the trialling organisation or by a central body. and similarly who would fund that. So we have a couple of polls at the end of the session to get some high-level feedback on this, and then we'll also be sending out some of the questionnaires with a little more detail in them after the session. So if you do have an opinion that you'd like to get across, it'd be really useful to get some of that detailed feedback from you via those questionnaires. So do fill them out if you feel like you have an opinion to share. So there are also some potential future enhancements of the tool that we'll be looking at should we get some additional funding or a need to develop them. So these are based off of the engagement that Ros has mentioned earlier, where there were still some common issues underlying all the different stakeholder groups. So one of those would be sort of sharing lessons learned during trials and testing via a sort of centralized database that records the outputs and lessons learned from incidents, near misses, and other and positive outcomes as well, and positive lessons learned. So the aim there is to really sort of start to share this kind of information across the sort of CAM industry in the UK and make sure that safety assurance is improving. Another sort of issue was the need to keep stakeholders up to date. So there's potential enhancements there about providing some kind of newsfeed to provide sort of relevant updates to the changes in the CAM industry, changes to safety assurance, funding programs, etc. And also a database that contains a list of regulations, standards, and guidelines, which sort of boils those documents down into the key requirements that each stakeholder needs to be aware of, and sort of structuring that in a useful way. So those are some of the potential enhancements that we'll be looking at in the future. So just to bear those in mind. Next slide, please. So actually, I think we're going to go to a demo now. So if you drop your screen, Jante, I'll just bring up the tool. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen, but shout if not. I think we're okay.
Yeah, that's good, Will.
Brilliant, thanks, Jante. So you can see now that I'm logged into the IMAP tool, so CAMSAT module. And as I said, there are two key roles with the reviewing side of the tool. So that's the reviewers and the trialing organizations. But there's also a third role, which we've called the product owner. So at the moment, I'm signed in as a product owner. And the product owner really has two key responsibilities. So that's organization management, which is essentially adding organizations to be able to have access to the tool. So this would be a reviewing organization. So for example, a local authority would have this sort of access to the tool. They would be invited by the product owner to have access and then manage their own organization. But the key feature for the product owner is the creation and management of the safety assurance questionnaires that will be used in the tool. So currently, so you can see there's just a number of demo questionnaires that I've created. Currently, only the product owner will be able to create and edit questionnaires. And we've done that intentionally. So the aim is to create standard questionnaires for different types of user groups. So one that's consistent across all local authorities, for example, and one that's consistent across test beds, etc. So the aim there is to really maintain consistency of the questions asked and the level of detail. So hopefully that's really beneficial for the trialing organisation that has to go to these different areas of the UK and has consistent requirements. If there are, then obviously there are individual requirements, and there may be bespoke sort of questions that are required. So the product owner can then work with sort of reviewing organisations to make sure that those sort of requirements are met in there. But the real benefit is essentially that it's consistent for the trialing organisation, and it's simple and easily automatically updated for the reviewers. So there shouldn't have to be any kind of issue with updating it in response to emerging best practice. That'll be done by the product owner, who will then update those questionnaires and redistribute them to all the users. So once the questionnaire is created, it can be then assigned to a reviewer so that they can start using it. So I can simply do that by going to the list of the organisations that have access to the tool and simply hit assign questionnaire. And this will assign, I can then assign multiple questionnaires just by hitting save there. So the intent is that we have multiple different types of questionnaires, and the reviewers might need that for different types of trial. So this could cover, for an example, an automated vehicle trial would be done via one questionnaire. There might be one that's more focused on remote operation. There may be other use cases as well, such as sort of new mobility trials and other sort of last mile delivery pods, that sort of thing. So intent that there is that there's multiple questionnaires that allow varying levels of flexibility depending on the type of trial that's being conducted. So now that that questionnaire has been assigned to a reviewer, that reviewer can then start sending out those questionnaires to trialing organizations to fill out. So I've just changed screen here, and now I have access as a reviewer. So I'm now logged in as a reviewer, and they obviously have three main responsibilities. One is to manage, so when it just loads, I'll show you. But one is to manage their own organization, so they can add multiple users within their organization to use the tool and conduct the reviews. And there's practically unlimited number of users there. It's around 300 per user group. But the main sort of responsibility would be for the reviewers to invite the trialing organizations to fill out a questionnaire. So they can do that by first going to trialing organization management. And really this is where, for example, if a trialing organization contacted a local authority, for example, saying that they'd like to trial in their area, the local authority would then simply add those contact details into the tool of the trialing organization. So just adding the basic point of contact details for the trial designer. And then once they are sort of available in the system, the reviewer can then start to invite that trial designer to take the questionnaire that's most relevant to them. So that can be done by simply selecting the relevant trialing organization and invite. And then I can choose the most appropriate questionnaire and then hit send. So then that will send an email to the trialing organization contact, and that will essentially invite them to take the questionnaire. So the trialing organization then just has to access the tool via a web page, and then they can fill out the questionnaire, and they won't need to set up the account. So I can just move now back to what the questionnaire looks like. So this is an example questionnaire, but I've put some questions in there to give you a flavor about what questions might be asked and how the questions are structured. So the aim is that they're primarily yes/no questions aimed at sort of the trialing organization to self-declare compliance with relevant standards and regulations. So they are primarily yes/no type of questions, but there can also be text added or files to be attached if needed. So you can see that there's just some example questions there. So this is something here that I'd like to sort of draw on. So this is a key feature that we want to show for reviewers, is that the questionnaire can really highlight to the reviewer whether the preferred answer is given or not. So in this example, it says that a safety driver is not in the vehicle into the answer of this question. Now that's still compliant with the code of practice. As we know, safety drivers don't have to be in the vehicle for elements of remote operation. But what this does do is it easily indicates to the reviewer whether they should ask more questions and whether there's further information about safety that needs to be uncovered. So that's the real benefit for the reviewer, and hopefully that streamlines their thinking in terms of how they conduct the reviews. And it really helps them to understand whether the sort of the right answers are being given and when to ask for that sort of further information. So once the reviewer is so if they did have any additional comments, they can simply add those comments here, and there's also a capacity to add images and text to this. So you can see I've added a comment there just asking for further information. And then it can then be sent back to the trialing organization to resubmit or change their answer or adapt their answer in response to the comment. So to do that, the reviewer will then just simply submit comments. Those will be sent back to the trialing organization via email. They'll then address those comments and resubmit. And so that's hopefully a really key function that allows both parties to communicate and exchange information very easily, but it also allows that information to be kept easily accessible and where it's most relevant in response to the various questions that are being asked. So if once the review is sort of finished and the reviewer has no further comments or questions and everything has been addressed, then the reviewer can simply hit complete review. The trialling organisation will then be notified that the review is complete and the file is closed. So the aim is then that concludes essentially the safety assurance activity for that reviewer, and the whole process should essentially be very simple and efficient for both parties. So that was a very, very quick demo on how the tool works, but hopefully you can see the sort of the benefit of the tool and benefit of CAMSAT, and should really help. The aim is to really help streamline that safety assurance process and to sort of address those key challenges. So that was a very quick demo. I'm now going to pass back to Ros, who's got some other information to share with you.
Hi, I'm taking the presentation back on. Thank you. Hopefully you've got a good understanding of the tool and the challenges that we're trying to address. We thought we'd share a couple of sound bites with you. In fact, where's the presentation gone? Whilst Anto's getting it back on, we thought we'd share a few sound bites with you to hear perspectives directly from the relevant industry stakeholders who've started to engage with, who we've started to engage with on the tool. So the first of this is Graham Smith, who is Head of Deployment at Oxbotica, and as outlined earlier, Oxbotica is part of the endeavour consortium. Have we got the presentation here?
Is that not visible to you, Ros? Hang on, let me share it again.
Don't know if anybody else can. Apparently everybody else can see it, so I might have to come out of the chat and go back in. If you, oh, that's it. I can see it now. Perfect.
Yeah. Okie dokie.
Oh no, skip back one. That's it.
Hello, my name is Graham Smith, and I'm the Programme Director of Project Endeavour. Today I wanted to talk about the importance of safety assurance. So as part of Project Endeavour, Oxbotica has added our software to a small fleet of 6 vehicles, which we're using to demonstrate autonomy in places like Oxford, Birmingham and London. One of the key imperatives for us as we start to deploy autonomous vehicles into public environments is to be able to ensure the safety of pedestrians, other drivers and our staff. Safety is ultra important to us, and it's an integral part of the culture here at Oxbotica. Being able to provide assurances on safety is also really important to the various other organisations we work with, both inside our consortium and outside. However, the safety story is very detailed and it can get confusing. The story starts in very early stages in the design of our software, the implementation of that software into vehicles, the training of our staff that supervise the autonomous vehicles. The safety case also covers things like risk assessment of the routes that we run on, the weather conditions we experience, and also consideration of exactly where and when we'll be operating, both in private and in public environments. Now, whenever we visit a new city to prepare for an autonomous trial or a demonstration, we always find a lot of interest from local authorities and emergency services, but often there's a lot of confusion about what levels of approval are required. And some stakeholders, quite understandably, find it very difficult to stay up to date with the most relevant standards and guidance. So we recognise that stakeholders need to receive adequate assurance that any trial taking place in their area is being conducted safely. And additionally, we find out that local authorities want to avoid taking on liability for those trials, and what they really need is clarity and confirmation that the responsibility for ensuring safety during those field trials remains with trialling organisations like Oxbotica. Now, in Project Endeavour, TRL has engaged with a wide range of our stakeholders, both again inside the consortium and outside, and that's included local authorities, road authorities, emergency services and insurers. And the aim of TRL's engagement has been to explore what sort of tool, what sort of information stakeholders would need in order to support a more consistent approach to safety assurance, wherever we go. So I'm really pleased now to see that TRL are able to demonstrate the software tool they've been developing for trial safety assurance. And as a leader of the Endeavour Consortium, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it works in real life and getting your feedback.
Next slide, please. So now we'll hear from Oliver Howes, and he's a senior technical consultant from the SMLL testbed in Greenwich, which hosts obviously a number of CAD trials. I can't hear that. Can anyone else hear it?
Let me just try resharing again.
We haven't had these issues on the other two webinars.
I think my computer's getting tired.
The Smart Ability Living Lab, or SMLL for short.
I can hear it now.
Hi, I'm Oliver Howes, and I'm a...
Oh,
Poor Oliver, might not be able to hear him. Try one more time, maybe.
Hi, I'm Oliver Howes, and I'm a senior technical consultant for the Smart Ability Living Lab, which is a TRL company. The Smart Ability Living Lab, or SMLL for short, is an urban test facility created to accelerate the creation and development of new mobility technology and solutions. Much of our work involves supporting customers run many different types of trials on public roads at our two instrumented sites in East London, one in Stratford and one in Woolwich in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Testing and validation of technology in a public environment is going to play a key role in the success of new mobility technologies. However, to ensure progressive development of such technologies, safety must be carefully considered. SMLL have a responsibility for the safety of trials taking place in the London CAM testbed, and therefore, as part of our trial deployment process, we conduct a review of all trial safety cases. These reviews must be appropriate for the trial being conducted. For example, if a manually driven trial is planned, SMLL acknowledges that the amount of information required within a safety case is far reduced when compared to an automated vehicle trial involving members of the public. Defining a suitable level of information and detail can sometimes be difficult. The creation and review of a trial safety case needs to be a smooth process, one which is not just a box-ticking exercise, and also one which doesn't create barriers to testing. Using an online collaborative platform to facilitate this safety case review would really help with this. When conducting public trials, the information required by local stakeholders can sometimes be a little unclear. At SMLL, we aim to make this process better understood by our customers, the testing organisations, and a collaborative tool to assist with this would be of great benefit. SMLL also acknowledges that there's potentially a lot of commercially sensitive information in and around a trial safety case. Therefore, sharing the correct and relevant information to satisfy local stakeholders is key. The tool that TRL have been developing in consultation with stakeholders, including test facilities such as SMLL, local authorities, and testing organisations, sounds an interesting and important tool in overcoming these barriers, and I look forward to seeing the initial demonstration.
Next slide, please. So obviously you've heard from us, you've heard from a couple of industry stakeholders on what they think about the tool. So we've got a couple of feedback polls to hear what you think. So the first one is around how useful you think the CAMSAT tool will be, and the second is around who you think should fund the tool. So I'm just going to launch those now. 1 second. First one, you should receive something now. So TRL colleagues, please don't vote. We're just keen to hear what other people think, not internally. If you could submit your votes now. Just give you a few seconds to do that. That's 6 so far. Anybody else want to add anything in the votes? 8. 9. Okay, so whilst we're still doing that, I'm going to launch the second poll, which is, who do you think should fund the hosting of the tool? So trialing organisations, reviewers of safety assurance, or a central body? We should get a second voting. Okay, so whilst people are still voting, just to share the results of the first one. So we had, we had 44% said somewhat useful, 33% said extremely useful, and 22% said neutral in terms of the tool. So that's really useful feedback. In the second poll, we had 33% of people felt the trialling organisation should fund the tool, 33% the reviewers of safety assurance, and then 33% central body. So that's absolutely straight down the line for all three. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much. That's really useful feedback. So we can go to the next slide, please, Ianto. So this leads us to the end of the formal presentation element of the session. Once again, if you are involved in CAV trials and are open to trying the tool, we'd really welcome people to get in touch and demo the tool for us. It's obviously going to be free of charge over the summer, whilst we've still got Endeavour funding in place. So please drop us a line if you're interested in being involved in demo. We really would appreciate as many people trying the tool as possible. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'll open the floor. Obviously, there's been some questions on the chat so far, and they've been addressed. But I'll open the floor to hear any feedback anyone's got on what you've seen today, so that we can kind of improve, ready for implementation, or otherwise any other questions other than those that's already been posed on the chat. So over to you guys. Has anyone got any questions? No.
Hi, Ros. Not so much a question really, but just to say, I feel all the pain of the process and everything, and how challenging it's been, and everything you've said on there is absolutely right. There's a total variation of knowledge and understanding. You know, as an insurer, we're struggling a lot of the time to engage with people, because you've got some very good technical people who don't understand what we want and so on. So, you know, and the point I made about the self-certifying, that'll be brilliant for people who just want to know you've got one. And for us, if there's that little bit more detail about certain parts of it, then great. So yeah, well done. It's really good.
Thank you. I think for the insurers, we weren't sure about that stakeholder, whether, you know, there'd be an interest in the tool, because we knew that you'd want more detail. But what we can do with the tool is create, you know, all sorts of questionnaires for different bespoke audiences. So certainly we'd be keen to touch base and, you know, make sure that whatever the questionnaire would be for insurers fulfill all the needs that you need. But yeah, it's really good feedback. So thank you.
Okay, just halfway through my email to you, so you'll get it in a minute.
Right. Is there any questions on the chat there? Lots of things have flipped up. No, that was just other. Oh, hang on, we've got one here. From Thomas, what level of detail do you think an LA should review a safety case? I wouldn't expect them to have automotive system safety expertise. I'll give Will that question.
Yeah, thanks, Ros. Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Obviously, that's one of the sort of key challenges we came through. We noted through the safety stakeholder engagement. Often the local authorities didn't have the relevant experience. But what we did want to do is to create a tool that would both sort of educate them a little bit more on the requirements from the various standards, and create a process where the trialing organisation is essentially declaring that information, so they don't have to do a detailed technical review. In terms of the questions that are being asked, obviously it's very configurable, so it can be a sort of lower level detail or higher level detail. But just for reference, Oxfordshire County Council obviously do a lot of work as a local authority in the sort of CAV space. They've developed a questionnaire as part of endeavour in sort of in step with this tool. So they've developed that, which goes through sort of questions that they think should be asked by a local authority and the level of detail applied there. So maybe perhaps we can share that as a link either in the chat or in the follow-up email for your reference. But that should hopefully give you an idea of what sort of questions are being asked.
Okay, any other questions or feedback the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, hi Ros, it's Graham Smith here from Oxbotica. First of all, well done, lovely presentation, very nice to see it coming to life. I'd just like to add, as one of the trialling organisations and of course as a partner of TRL in endeavour, we're really looking forward to rolling this tool out. I think Will said it right as he went through his presentation. It's always a confusing exercise when we first start to talk to a new local authority or even a new customer about deploying in their area. And historically, the first thing they ask for is like, send us your safety case. And we know that that's about a 5-month discussion. And really, we've really found that the local authorities really don't have the low level of expertise you need to actually assess a safety case and to be able to pronounce on whether it's a good one or a bad one. So I think the work that the TRL have come up with here is excellent. It gives a framework and helps local authorities understand what are the questions that they can ask that they would have a reasonable expectation that a trialling organisation like Oxbotica should be able to answer properly. So it's a great first step, and as well as local authorities, I think this framework is equally applicable to insurers and of course to fleet operators and customers of ours as well. So it's I think it's really going to make things easier. And of course, it's never the end of the conversation. There's always that next level. But I think in terms of an initial benchmark and framework, it's going to be excellent.
Thank you, Graham. I think we'll leave it there just because of the time. So thank you all for attending the session. I hope you found it useful. Please do get in touch if you want to discuss the tool further. And we'll send out an email early next week with a recording of the webinar, links to the guidance documents, the Zenzik document, which was coming up in another one, the local authority web page for Oxfordshire County Council, and also a link to the SMART survey. And we would really appreciate some more help, kind of feedback to help refine the tool. It's not a long survey, so it shouldn't take too long. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks all. Nice to see you all.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.